Last year, so many of us did not travel over the holidays. But this year, I feel like many families are preparing to hit the road to visit family. Some of those trips will involve long car rides, and some of you will be flying. I've heard from families planning day trips and from others who will be staying with family or staying at a hotel for multiple days or even a week plus. Some of your children will have their own room to sleep in during these travels, and some of you are going to need to room share. I also know that on top of everything else, many will be traveling to a different time zone. So today, I'm going to share some tips to help you with all those different travel scenarios. But before I dive in, I want to remind everyone that this show is for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Hi there. Welcome back. It's that time of year again. Lots of families are gearing up for holiday travel. I always like to joke that when you're traveling with kids, it's not really a vacation. It's actually more of a quote trip. There are so many moving pieces, and it's often not all that relaxing. But I know from personal experience that the fastest way to have a trip suddenly feel like a nightmare is to end up with overtired babies or children. Because when that happens, no one is going to have very much fun. So today, I want to help you plan for a smooth trip that doesn't end with everyone being exhausted. I'm just going to dive right into the most valuable tip that I have for you here today, and then we'll move on to logistics. The most important thing that you can do to maintain your child's sleep habits and to maintain a well rested child is to keep them on their sleep schedule. I know this isn't always easy, but man, it sure does increase the fun factor when you're able to pull it off. I know that maintaining their schedule can feel particularly challenging because right out of the gate, you're going to have things working against you because you're going to have a travel day that you need to navigate. So let's start right there. If you're traveling by car, the best thing that you can do is to work to ensure that your child naps during their typical nap times. It can be very tempting to just let them sleep whenever they want to in hopes of getting as much quiet time during the drive as humanly possible. But the potential problem with that is that you're going to arrive at your destination and your child is already going to be off their sleep schedule. So, if you have a child who's prone to falling asleep easily in the car, I find that the easiest way to keep the naps on schedule is to have a parent sit in the back and engage with the baby or child until you're about within 15 minutes of their typical nap start time. Then you can climb back up front, turn off the music, turn on some white noise. I'll link to my favorite travel white noise machine in the show notes and sit quietly until your child falls asleep. Once they're asleep, you can go back to chatting with your partner and or listening to music or a podcast, and your child's likely going to keep on snoozing. If your child really likes to sleep in the car, you may find that you need to wake them from their nap to protect their next nap start time and or their bedtime. It's fine to let them sleep a little bit longer than usual because car sleep isn't as restorative as flat, motionless crib sleep. But we don't want them to sleep too much outside of their typical nap window because that could throw everything else off. Once they're up, if you're on a longer car ride, you may find that you need to entertain them again by sitting in the back and actively working to keep them from falling back to sleep until it's time for their next nap or bedtime. And while my husband and I are not people who could safely drive through the night to reach our destination, I have a lot of clients who like to take this approach. And if you plan to do the driving through the night, I recommend handling sleep in a similar fashion. Have your little one in their pajamas and then keep them up until you're within about 15 minutes of their typical bedtime window. Then you'll climb back up front, let them fall asleep, and when you reach the destination, if it's still the middle of the night, you can hopefully transfer them right into their bed. If you have a little one who no longer gets night feeding, so an infant under 12 months who's typically at home, not needing night feedings, you may have to make an exception here if transferring them from the car to the bed is really disruptive and you would typically nurse them or give a bottle before bedtime. I would just go ahead, change them, nurse them, give them the bottle, and then put them to bed, even if it's not a time when you would typically give a feeding. So that can be helpful if you're doing a car to bed transition in the middle of the night. All right, let's talk a little bit about flying. Obviously, it's going to be trickier to maintain your child's sleep schedule when you fly. If you're able to book a flight that aligns with your child's nap, that's amazing and you're incredibly lucky. But if you're not, I don't want you to panic. I have a preference for flying earlier in the day. So if all else fails, I can at least protect my kids' bedtime. But that's also not always possible. Depending on your child's age, I recommend taking sleep where you can get it when flying is involved. Younger babies often sleep well on airplanes because, let's be honest, they're kind of like a giant white noise machine. But as babies become more mobile, some are going to really start to resist and struggle to sleep on the airplane. So that may mean that you're getting a nap in the stroller or the carrier in the airport or in the car on the way to your destination once you've arrived. If you have a child who's still napping, chances are that they are going to get less total day sleep during this travel day than they typically would get at home. And it will likely not all occur during the typical sleep windows that they work in. Stressing about this isn't going to be that helpful to you. So just go through the day trying to get sleep where you can and remind yourself that an early bedtime is your friend. I actually recommend building that idea into your schedule when you arrive. So plan to put your little one down to bed 30, 45, maybe even 60 minutes earlier than usual so they can make up for some of that missed daytime sleep on the front end of their night's sleep. And then they'll start the next day well rested. All right, so you've made it to your destination. Now we need to set up your child's sleep space and plan for what you're going to do while you're there. I want you to replicate their sleep setup and their routine as much as possible. That means that I want you to bring their typical pajamas, their sleep sack or their swaddle, a white noise machine. It doesn't have to be their specific white noise machine. It could be a travel one, but if they use white noise at home, you want to have it with you when you travel as well. Bring the typical bedtime books that you would read to them. If you have an older child who uses a toddler clock or a sleep light, don't forget to bring that too. That little baby travels with us everywhere. I even have families who will bring a sheet that their baby slept on the night before the trip so they can use it in the crib in the new location and have that sheet smell familiar to their baby. Once you have the room set up, I want you to move forward with the assumption that your baby or child is going to have no issues sleeping there. Sometimes they really surprise us, and it's not a big deal. So put them down to bed or down for their naps at their typical times. Do the typical bedtime or nap routine and put them down just like you typically would. If they are thrown off by their new sleep environment, it's totally fine to provide a little extra support while they're adjusting. And remember that keeping them on their schedule is also going to help them adapt and adjust more quickly because it's going to be in line with their natural sleep rhythm and when they have their strongest pulls to sleep. Now, if you need to room share with your baby or child during the trip, whether it's at someone's house or at a hotel, things could potentially be a little trickier, but it also might be a non-event depending on your child's personality. So go into it assuming that your child's going to sleep well. And if you know that you have a child who's going to be disrupted by the room sharing, and they can still fit into a travel size crib, a crib like the Slumber Pod can be a lifesaver because it allows you to put your child into their own blackout space within the room that you're in. And if, by the way, you're interested in purchasing a slumber pod at a discount, you can use my affiliate discount code, which is Sleep and Wellness 20, and that will save you $20. So that can be helpful if you're able to travel with a travel crib. And if you're staying at a home, you can do your typical bedtime routine and then ideally leave the room. But if you're at a hotel, that's not really an option. So, what I recommend there is that you do your typical bedtime routine and then hang out in that little hallway nook to the bathroom that's out of sight of your child, or hang out in the bathroom itself. I can't tell you how many times I've put my girls to bed in a hotel room. My husband has headed down to the lobby, and then I've sat on the side of the tub or even in the tub reading or watching a show until my girls fell asleep. Then, once they fall asleep, I just slip into bed and I watch a show on my iPad with my headphones, and they just keep on snoozing. And because I'm someone who likes to prepare and have a plan, I always like to play out the worst case scenario. So let's say you're staying at a hotel and your 2-year-old wakes up during the night and starts to throw an absolute fit because they see you right there in that bed and they no longer want to stay in their crib and sleep. So, what should you do then? Obviously, you're not going to let them cry or scream for very long because soon the neighboring room will be calling the front desk. If you're unable to calm them and keep them in their crib, chances are they're going to end up in the bed with you. If the sleep situation regresses to that point, I really don't want you to panic. It kind of is what it is. I just want you to plan to do a total reset the moment you get home. When you get home, I don't want you to let one night go by that you don't have your child practicing their typical healthy sleep habits. Kids, even infants, are so smart, you guys. If you always get things right back on track as soon as you get home, it is not going to take more than a few trips for them to realize that things might be a little different when you travel, but when you come home, things are going to fall right back into place. Now, let's talk about traveling to different time zones. Generally speaking, I recommend switching your child to the new time ASAP. It's always important to remember that their circadian rhythm and ours is primarily driven by natural light and the rhythm of their day, i.e., when they eat meals, etc. So I find a faster switch to be both easier and more effective. If the time difference is just 1 hour, you can either not switch your child's schedule at all, or you can just switch them right over when you get there. We've traveled a lot between Northern Indiana and Chicago, where there's a 1 hour time difference, and we've successfully handled this both ways. So if you're only going for a night or two, not switching them at all is probably easiest. If it's a longer visit, just switch them right away. And that usually is a non event. But if your kiddo is overtired or wakes too early one morning or too early from a nap, just go for that extra early bedtime the next night to help them reset. If you're traveling across the country and dealing with something that's more like a 3 hour adjustment, whether you switch instantly or over a 24-hour period is going to depend on how that travel day goes. If naps were a mess and your child has gotten less sleep than normal, I often find that switching them right away when you arrive is the easiest way to go about it. If that won't work because of the timing of their day sleep or it would result in them going to bed too early, you can switch them halfway when you arrive. So if you're traveling west to east, that may feel a little tricky, even if your child is tired, because they might not be quite ready to go to bed at that earlier time. And if that's the case, the most important thing you can do is wake them at their typical wake time the next morning, even if that means that they will end up getting less sleep that night before. That's going to allow you to have your child nap at their typical nap time the next day and to have them go to bed in their typical bedtime window that second night that you're there. Then you'll do the same thing. Wake them at the appropriate time the next morning and forge ahead on your typical schedule. The quick switch is really effective, and it's actually the approach I took when we traveled to Italy 2.5 years ago. It was a 6 hour time difference, and they were ahead of us. So we flew overnight, but obviously it was a short night of sleep for the kids. I want to say the flight was 7, 8-ish hours. So it wasn't their typical 11 plus hours of sleep. We got to our hotel around lunch. I fed them lunch and then we ate dinner at a normal time. Well, a little bit later because it was Italy, but a fairly normal dinner time. And then I put them to bed at 8 p.m., which is 1 hour later than their typical bedtime. But of course, that was also 3 p.m. back home. One of my girls, Addison, my oldest, was so tired from the trip that she fell right to sleep and slept the whole night. My younger daughter, Ainsley, didn't fall asleep until almost 1 a.m., which was 7 p.m., her typical bedtime back home. But what I did was I kept her in that dark room with me from 8 p.m. on, because again, I was trying to reset her circadian rhythm. So I kept her in the dark room, and then she ultimately fell asleep. And then what I did that was kind of painful is I woke both girls up at 8 a.m. So Ainsley obviously was tired the next day. She hadn't gotten a full night of sleep, but you better believe that she napped like a champ that day, and she went to bed beautifully the next night and slept the whole night through. What's really important with these time changes is that you wake them the next morning at the appropriate time and you get them outside quickly. They need that natural light exposure, that sun exposure, to help reset their circadian rhythm. And that's also going to really set them up for success going into night 2. So there you have it. Those are my recommendations for handling sleep while you travel so that you can maintain your sanity and hopefully have some fun. I'll say it one more time. My biggest tip is that you prioritize maintaining your child's sleep schedule, which I know is easier said than done. And I know that it can be particularly challenging over the holidays when you have family members with their own plans, schedules, and sometimes different opinions. That's why I'm in the middle of trying to nail down a time to bring my very first guest onto the podcast. I'm hoping that this first guest will be my husband, Mike, so that we can share our golden rule around scheduling with our families and handling their opinions and feelings. But as I've been recording this episode, I see that he's proposed a new time that doesn't work in my schedule. Oh, the life of coordinating with our spouses. But my plan is to have that episode for you next week, so stay tuned. Thanks for listening today. I hope that these tips help you feel more confident as you head into the holiday travel season. And before I hop off, I want to ask a quick favor. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would love for you to leave a review through the Apple Podcast app. It would mean the world to me. Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.